She is on a grant program from Eagle to the university, and apparently has been for several years now, right? And so part of her job is to talk about these new technologies. So I'm going to let her do her presentation for you today that talks about some of the clean energy technologies, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. Okay, she just got here, so.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
We still got some free seats somewhere. I'm amazed by the turnout. Thank you all for coming. If you don't hear me well, give me a sign and I'll try to raise my voice so that everyone can understand what I'm saying. Thanks for having me. I'm Madeline Kroll. I am at the University of Michigan, not MSU, but go blue. Actually, MSU and us, we work together a bunch, and we call ourselves friends. So, no hard feelings here.
We like that.
Great. I am a researcher at the University of Michigan. I have a very long job title, Clean Energy Land Use Specialist. And at the team at the Center for Empowering Communities, that's what we call ourselves at the University of Michigan, we have, for the past 5 years, received funding from Eagle to support local governments in Michigan with their planning and zoning for renewable energy. And that has been a couple of years ago, been lots of wind. Currently, there's a lot of solar development, and super recently, more and more of these storage projects are popping up in Michigan, so that's something that we're trying to help folks like yours figure out and understand better. So Eagle paid for my gas tonight, but I'm also involved in other sorts of zoning-related research across the Great Lakes states from funding from the Department of Energy. So I'm a zoning nerd. I'm a planner by training. I'm not an attorney. I have to say that because I will be talking a little bit today about significant legal changes that relate to how we cite these wind, solar, and storage projects in Michigan. I'll give you this introduction because I think it's important to understand what the options are from the law. I know what, like Bob and I have talked prior to this too, like what the plan is for Groveland Township. But as a planner, I have to give you like the whole spiel. Before we talk about battery energy storage systems and the impacts that these systems have on communities. I'm also going to be very honest with you. The center of our work is the interest of the community and not a push for renewable energy this way or the other way. Every energy source has positive and negative impacts, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, if the community doesn't want it, do we have a say so?
Unfortunately, and thank you for the transition to this new law.
No,
It's-
which is kind of bullshit, but no.
Absolutely. I appreciate comments and questions throughout, like don't hold back, but I'm also not the state. Yeah.
Do we just have one primal stream and then that
No.
Say that again?
Do we have just one primal stream and then that's over with?
Yeah, I think the key thing is she's not the enemy, she's here to give us some
Well,
information.
basically,
She's
the
been
enemy-
helpful to me.
The enemy is
in my
right
question.
there. There's no one standing on that stage right
I
now.
understand your concern. So actually, the legislature passed a bunch of bills that relate to energy. My favorite, because that's my bread and butter, it's not my favorite actually, but it's my bread and butter, is PA 233 that I'll be mentioning a lot today, which basically takes for projects larger than, for storage it's 50 megawatts, enables the developer to get a permit through the state rather than through local zoning if certain conditions are met. So basically limiting zoning control for those large projects. There have been a bunch of other laws on energy efficiency, and there's one, PA 235, that I want to give a shout out to because for the first time, and now Michigan is one of the few states in the country that have energy storage targets. Legally binding with clause to build out 2,500 megawatts of storage in the next 5 years, which is from 0 to 2,500, a very large jump. With this are also renewable energy goals that have been upped a little bit, and basically clean energy goals as well. The difference between renewable and clean energy goals is that clean energy includes renewable energy plus nuclear energy or natural gas as long as the carbon is captured. And Michigan aims to be carbon-free 100% by 2040. The new law enables for local governments that have to deal with zoning three options. The local government can choose to have projects be cited by the state, the Michigan Public Service Commission, which is what MPSC stands for. Is that a question? No. The new law, creates this term of a compatible renewable energy ordinance. I call it a CREO. The law specifically lays out, and I will lay out in just a second, what a CREO can all entail. The third option is a workable ordinance, one that doesn't really meet the requirements of the law, but one that the developer might still find workable, which is something that my understanding is Groveland Township is working towards this. There are benefits and drawbacks of each of the paths. Having a project go to the MPSC, and it can either be by choice, or it can be if, I'll mention that in a second. There are some advantages of having it go to the MPSC. I know that some communities have told me it's easy to just push the controversy to the state and not have to deal with it at the local level. And it's easy and cheap, you don't have to amend your zoning ordinance. There's a lot of drawbacks too, which I'll acknowledge in just a second too. A CREO, so a very restricted zoning ordinance with just the terms that are laid out in the law, is very attractive to developers. It's quick because the local process is quicker for them than the state process. And it ensures for the local government that the process stays local rather than having to go to the state. The third option, the workable ordinance, we can't really say no, but we can voice the most of the community's concerns in a workable ordinance. And there is not a risk, if you have a CREO, and you tell the developer you have a CREO, but then you actually deny the project, or the developer thinks that you don't have a CREO, there are penalties associated with this. You don't have this.
Who picked our area? Who do we get to thank for picking Groveland Township?
Developer.
So I have
Who's
a
the
question.
developer?
Okay, so what about the snakes? 'Cause I hear that's a rattlesnake sanctuary. So that's like the biggest thing I hear. What about them? I mean, I love snakes. You
I think there will be a bunch of environmental permits.
No, I mean, it's honestly, and then what do you do with the batteries when they're done? How do you recycle them? Because
Let me
it
get
seems
to
like
that.
everything's clean energy.
I will
But
get,
I guarantee it, it's not that clean.
there's a question.
So what I'm seeing is that we do have choices. We've been told we don't have any choices, but someone chose the workable choice. So if we did MPSC, the cheap, but we want the tax money, right? That's all we hear about is the damn tax money we're gonna get. So if we went, who picked the workable option? Why can't we not fight the state? Who picked it? I didn't get any notification of any of this crap, and I live on top of it. This is in my backyard, literally in my backyard.
This
Who
is
picked?
because
I didn't
there
vote
is
for it.
really not an option. What she's saying is, these are the three ways they get cited. But if you tell somebody they can't do it, they just go to that first option,
Yeah.
and they get it from the MPSC.
But it would have been nice to get a little notification.
Well, you got
No,
as much notification as I
You're
got.
supposed to do it by the mail.
No,
By
it
the
is
mail.
wrong, Pinocchio.
I just found
It's
it.
not I found out from going to a garage sale last
A garage
Friday.
sale, we found out, buddy. You're lying.
All I can tell you is I've given stories to the newspaper
Yes, you've given
3
many
times.
stories.
As soon as
Many
they
stories.
came out, I ran a video right after I gave the story, and it's still on the cable channel, or on Facebook, nonstop, 24 hours a day. And I invited the person that made the application, because the normal course of business, when somebody wants to do something commercial in the township, is to come to the township supervisor and say, I'm looking at doing this, I wanna talk to you about
So
it.
Bob,
And that's how it got
did you-
started.
Bob, did you get it?
How long did
Did
you
you get
go
it in
waiting
mail?
for?
And then-
Told us.
No, when the gas company came around, and they did it throughout the whole township, we had to drive all the way to Fenton to basically do the exact same thing to see where they're doing this, but that's gas, they literally own the property, and this is totally different, they bought the piece of property.
Well,
And how did they, so basically they bought it, and they already know they're gonna actually do it.
Well, because I'm telling you, what she's saying
We had
is,
surveyors on our
I
property
can't
6
tell
months
somebody
ago.
they cannot buy
That
property.
is a
Yeah,
really,
no,
that's
wait
really
for
so
it to
messed
come
up.
out.
That's not even right.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm telling you, the township
How long you been on the
cannot disallow the law. It's that simple.
Right. But how long have you known about this?
You know when you saw the first story in the Citizen?
I don't wanna
About
know.
I'm telling you, that
How
was
long
4
have
weeks
you
ago.
known?
About 3 days before that story showed up in the Citizen.
When was that?
About 4 weeks ago.
That's as long as you've known anything about this.
I told them as soon as it came out.
We're recording
We
this.
sure are.
You can't record it.
When did Vesper contact Michael Sanford for the purchase of his land?
I have no idea. They don't
He
tell
just
us.
closed on it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I don't know. They don't tell us. People don't tell us when
Yeah.
we're buying property until
They're
after.
lying to us,
But
guys.
when
You didn't know
did
they
Ves-
surveyed
so
the land?
when did you find out that this was going to be in the works?
When Vesper called me and said, we've acquired
was
some,
that?
we have an option to lease with an option to buy some property in
And
their
what was
township.
what was that date?
Is about 4.5 weeks ago. Just before the story showed up. Absolutely. I did not delay anything.
So when a company is going to purchase some land, typically they don't make the sale final until it's been approved.
And my understanding is they have an option, they have said we have leased this property with an option to buy. When they met with me, Vesper, that's what they said, we've leased this property and we have an option to buy.
Is that zone residential?
It's rural estate farm like most of the township, which is basically our farm.
So did you
Put
get
a battery on it.
permit to lease the property?
Yeah.
Do you have to have a permit to lease property?
No,
Did you talk to Springfield?
I do as a landlord.
Did you talk to
Oh, I gotta have a
Springfield?
permit.
I can only hear if you ask one at a time.
Okay,
Yes,
Tucker Road, south of Tucker, or actually west of Tucker, is Springfield Township.
yes,
So I'm within a mile of where this could go.
okay.
So that road there, yes, Groveland takes off and goes north, but we.
Okay.
Well, and just so we're clear,
Springfield
I
Township.
called the township supervisor in Springfield and let her know this was going on. In fact, I told all of the supervisors at our monthly luncheon, I've been approached by a company named Vesper for one of these storage batteries. Has anybody else had anything to do with them? Because I'm trying to find out something. So you cannot say I didn't go out of my way to tell everybody as soon as I got it, and in multiple venues that are still running today. So don't say I didn't. I told Springfield right out of the gate, this is happening. I invited them to the meeting on the 3rd of June if they wanted to come. I invited them to this if they wanted to come. My video has been running nonstop from my cable guy for about 4 or 5 weeks now.
Your video
Well,
says
they're
we
nice
don't
if they
exist on
contacted
Tucker
us.
Road. You said there's no residents gonna be impacted.
I did not say there was going to be no residents impacted.
Shall we
I
play the
said
video?
the piece of property that they have has nobody living on it. It's empty 62 acres, and it is.
So it will have no impact on residents, because nobody lives there. So
On the
I
piece of
heard
property
that.
that they acquired, obviously there's homes as you get away from the property, and I addressed that. That's why I called Springfield and said, I think you got 4 or 5 houses across the township line in Springfield. When we look at the aerial service, and it looks like there's a couple of Groveland residents down the road.
Yeah, and all trips after that.
Yeah.
Seven houses.
How about you write us a check for those extra tax dollars and we'll just move?
I'm not, nobody's gonna write a check for anything.
Right.
You're upset. I understand you're being upset.
You don't understand.
Yes, I do understand, but you want me to be able to say that I can wave my hand and tell the state of Michigan, we don't care what laws you wrote and you don't have to do it, and I
want you to
can't.
stand up and fight, buddy.
You
Fight.
can't fight it.
You can fight. You choose
They
not to.
passed the law last
Who
year.
cares what they passed? Because
Well,
they said.
then you know what? Then if you really believe that, you should ask the residents to all chip in and fight it, because you're not going to win.
People are fighting all over the country. Fight.
There
Stand
has been a
up,
ballot
question.
initiative about this, and they have failed
To
to
get
get
the
enough
signatures.
signatures to put it on the November ballot.
Pens and paper don't work.
They will continue
May I speak
collecting
about that?
signatures.
Because
Yes.
I have been living and breathing this since November.
Yes, please.
And I did come to Bob, and I had a personal conversation with Bob, and asked him also to, he wouldn't mind taking around petitions and letting his planning commission know. And I thought his community should know that this may be, and not even knowing about this project then, but I just know where we live, they have plans for it, and how this area is zoned, and how Holly is zoned, and Springfield, it's open game, it's open season.
The whole
So,
state is.
I did, approach Bob at a breakfast and asked him to let his community know, and I think every planning commission should have been out with these petitions. Every mayor, supervisor, village manager should have been telling their community. No, we didn't get enough signatures because hardly anyone knew. It was a grassroots effort. And if you can't get your planning commission, your councils, your managers, like I just said, to make people aware, it's very difficult to do.
Amen.
So it's
Melanie,
going to
Melanie,
continue
both Teresa
for.
Bills and I have been circulating those petitions since we were able to get them.
Yeah.
And doing it as we're walking around.
I was
campaigning.
talking about Bob specifically, I had a conversation with him, and.
He
yes,
knows, he knows we're doing it.
I so appreciate that, I've had a handful of people that I so appreciate, I'm not talking about that.
And I answered your letter that you sent me originally and said, I fully support it, I agree. I am the guy that the Michigan Township Association asks to go up and testify when the sand and gravel industry tries to take away our local control on that.
Which-
I'm totally opposed to it,
the
but I do,
township-
but I said I can't, and I told you in that memo, I can't put this on the cable TV as we're endorsing it, because we're not supposed to tell people as an elected official, vote this way or that way. You can do it on your own privately, and
so
that's
could
what they're
you.
doing.
And so could you.
Well, it's
You could let your community know that there's an initiative. This is a bipartisan, this is a win-win for everybody. If your community wants this, not only can they have it, but they can,
I think many people.
they can do, they wouldn't be sitting here like this. They can do the ordinance specific to their area. And if your community
Which I would.
doesn't, yes, this would avoid, this would, if everybody would have signed in here, this would have avoided this.
Which,
But
now
people
you
don't.
understand though exactly
So
why
we
the
have
governor put the match.
160 more days approximately, that if y'all wanna sign and get involved, you should get online and do it, and it'll go on the ballot in 2 years. We didn't get enough for it to go on November's ballot. But I do have a question about the Creoles.
Yes, please.
Because, our understanding, the webinars and classes that we all had to go to. So, the Creo is something that, if it's not already in the works, it's too late.
To create a Creo?
Not
Yes,
necessarily.
because then you need to get your lawyers, you need to change the master plan, you need to change the zoning ordinances, you have to have public meetings for all of those to take place. And my understanding also is, if a piece of property, I'm so sorry, goes in between, let's say, Groveland and Holly, they share it. If both communities do not have a Creo, it's null and void.
No.
Is that correct?
That is a point of, the law was written with lots of gray area.
And that is
We
one of the
have-
areas.
We have tried to make the Public Service Commission aware, the Michigan Public Service Commission, who is now suddenly charged with the responsibility of permitting these things at the state level. The staff has for the last months been doing a great job, I have to say that, at having super frequent stakeholder engagement processes.
Yeah, I was in the
Where
one
they're
this
real,
morning
like,
as well.
where there have been some communities that have shared their opinion, that have shared their concerns. There have been lots of developers attending these meetings. And to be fair, there should be more communities and community members attending these workshops. The staff at the MPC is trying to figure out how are they going to implement this law. And there are questions about, attorneys disagree on whether or not you need to have a coordinated ordinance with your neighbor and with your county.
Yeah.
Currently, it is, the way the staff is interpreting it that way, that just the jurisdiction with zoning authority would have to have a Creo.
But they haven't put that.
Without coordinating with the neighbors.
Okay, so, but they haven't put that in the citing ordinance as of
Correct,
yet.
it's not yet what the Public Service Commission, like the staff is still working on a proposal, it will be out for public comment again June 21st, and then there will be, opportunity for public comment until July. I need to double check this before I tell you something wrong.
Yeah, and I probably have it in here too, I can look for it, but,
There will be opportunity for public comment again.
but the workable
But also I wanna,
was,
you
okay,
do not
go ahead.
have to redo your whole master plan just to get a Creo in the books.
No, just that portion,
Right.
correct. And you have to have public meeting. When
You
you
have
do
to have
that,
public meetings,
you
and
have
that
to hire
depends
an
on.
attorney and get,
And it has to be a really good one.
well, but you
Really
also
good.
have to have whatever company you use to do your zoning ordinances. They have to be up to speed and know what's going on, and they are so confused, because I have dealt with 2 areas, and, they interpret this differently, both of them.
Yep.
And the state interprets it differently, and in workshops, it's interpreted differently. It is a hot mess.
And this is why, and this might be frustrating for some of the things I will mention are assumptions, and the MPSC process will really determine at the end of the day what can be in a CREO, and that will set the bar for what local governments or what jurisdictions could ask for in a WIO, in a workable ordinance. So it is all in flux. It's a very frustrating moment. I hear all of you. Matter of fact is, this is the law now. Your township has to write an ordinance, or it will go through the state.
In November.
By the end of
Gotta
November.
be
Yes.
before.
If there is no ordinance on the books by the end of November, the developer still needs to knock on the door, have a public meeting where all of you can show up again and say how you feel about this, but then they can go to the state, because then the answer from Groveland Township will be, we do not have a CREO. And as soon as you don't have a CREO, it can go to the state. That's-
And as I also said before, to this point, Vesper has appeared to try to be cooperative. It's a discussion, it's not done.
Yep.
But we've tried to be cooperative, but they have said, if you don't approve it, we're gonna go to the state in November. So I'm just being honest with you. I don't like this
So then we gotta go to
situation
land
either.
use.
But I'm telling you, that's what the law is, and we're stuck with what it is. And
And-
pretending you don't like it won't fix it.
So basically, is that, so when's the governor get up, is it coming up for a new election, or is that? Get rid
The
of it?
developers,
Because they can tell you right
I am
now.
not a developer, but I know that many developers have suggested that they don't want to wait.
Hopefully everybody
They
here
have
that voted
ordering
for
times, they
is
have,
happy.
like, they would like to get things going and work with the local,
And
many,
mine
many
too.
developers, I don't know if we're
Raise
all.
your hand, sir.
Right here.
Of trying to make it work with the local government and pass an ordinance that is, meeting somewhere in the middle between what the developer would prefer and what the local jurisdiction would prefer. You had a question?
What kind of things can we as a local community put into the workable or the CREO to restrict or control anything about this?
Yeah, I will talk to that in just a second. Can I continue?
She has
Yes.
a presentation. Let's hear the presentation.
There's another question there.
She brought up about the place online that if you have another petition within 2 years, is that possible? Because we live about 2 miles on East High Road from the website. Never heard one thing about the petition.
Right.
Just weeks ago, there's like,
So now,
how can we watch for it?
I can talk to you after, but I don't wanna take your time up. I will let you know.
Also, I will stay after this presentation. If you have an opinion to share with me, or if you have a question, I'm here to take it all in. But let's continue with scheduled programming, and we'll get to your questions. All right, anyways, I was talking
Fast
about
forward,
the
fast.
benefits of each of these pests, which we have now established. Lots of people are not happy with either of these options. There is some community host benefit agreement that is required for from the developer to pay to the local government. It's $2,000 per megawatt per year. No, I'm sorry, it's 2,000 megawatt,
One time.
$2,000 per megawatt one time. That is like the host community agreement that the law requires for the developer to pay to the local government. If it is routed either through the CREO or through HERCL, so at the local option, there is a new grant from EGLE, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, that is rewarding communities or trying to provide a counterbalance to the host community agreement from the law, and provides a one-time $5,000 per megawatt grant to be spent by the local government for what it deems relevant, which would, for a project of the size of 300 megawatts, be $1.5 million, one-time payment at the beginning.
What if we don't care about the money?
What?
Why is it all be about money? We move past the money and talk about the environmental impact, our health, and the things that really matter.
It's a financial incentive provided for by the state. There are drawbacks, we can talk about them.
I get that.
Little opportunity to influence. Little opportunity to influence. And here, the problem with the workable ordinance is that there's no guarantee that the developer stays at the local level. If you're creating an ordinance that is exceeding CREO standards, because you're trying to maybe push the setback a little bit or do something else, at any time, the developer has the right to say, this is not viable for me, I'm going to permit through the state. The state option, let me tell you, also is not, brings additional requirements that the developer needs to do, so they like doing the local options. Some of the developers I've talked to, disclaimer. Okay. I want to talk about, I've kind of already teased it, it's the first time I'm doing the slides in this order, so I'm figuring out and learning that maybe this is not the great order, but let's talk a little bit about the MPSC process. I mentioned it, the local government can request it if they want, it's not really clear in the law how that looks like process-wise. Then, if you have a moratorium in place, lots of communities have moratorium in place for solar or wind. If you have a moratorium in place, at the time the developer wants to apply, it is considered non-CREO, and therefore automatically the option is available to the developer to go to the state. Or when you claim you have a CREO, but then you deny it, or if you're taking too long because there are very tight timelines in the CREO process, when a local meeting has to happen, when something needs to be published, when something needs to be decided upon, if you delay it, then that also enables the developer to go. So these are like the fall points of like when it can go to the state. There are some standards or some things that are unique to this new state process that we don't know from zoning prior. There are the set standards we'll get to in just a second about what can be in a CREO or in an ordinance. There's a lot of broad authority given to the MPSC, which is what they're currently trying to sketch out of like what do they actually all require document-wise from the developer? How are they going to evaluate some of the things that the law says? For example, the law says the MPSC may, this is not direct quote, but consider existing energy infrastructure or local plans. And that's currently what they're trying to sketch out more. Then there is, besides the 2K per megawatt one-time host community agreement, which I just mentioned, there's also, with the MPSC process, up to $150,000, in your case this would be a $75,000, this is if multiple jurisdictions are involved, if like a solar project typically spreads township lines. A grant for local governments to enable the local government to intervene in the proceedings that the MPSC is basically like a court case so that the local unit of government can hire an attorney and participate in these proceedings. If a developer wants to have the project cited through the state, they need to stick to certain apprenticeship and prevailing wage, like pay minimum wage to their construction workers. There's a bunch of like labor.
Davis-Bacon Act you're talking about? The Davis-Bacon Act you're talking about? The prevailing wage issue?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, what is a CREO? I mentioned it so much now, but let's actually talk about what it is. It is an ordinance, this is directly quoted from PA 233, an ordinance that provides for the development of an energy facility and the requirements of which are no more restrictive than the provisions in section 2268. So these are the provisions in section 2268. Anyone who has looked at a zoning ordinance before knows that typically a zoning ordinance includes a couple of other things. For storage, it is a 300-foot setback from NP, means non-participating house, 50 feet from the road and 50 from the non-participating property line. There is a noise restriction, so a CREO cannot be stricter than 55 decibels from the non-participating house. There is some dark sky friendly lighting stipulations in there, and then any project permitted or in a CREO will be subject to the National Fire Protection Association Standard 855, which is the industry standard for the installation of storage systems.
So, noise, it's right behind me, I'm at 8035 East Holly. So, is it like, is it gonna be humming?
Oh,
There is.
sure.
Why is the property line only 50 feet?
Give me 1 second.
Time
Mr.
out,
Tech
time out.
Help, can you help? That was all planned. Okay, so 855 decibels measured over the of an average for an hour. That's what the LEQ one.
I mean, how loud is it? I don't understand any of that. How loud is that?
You're talking more than 55 decibels.
It is not clouds.
I can tell you if you check the noise level near the expressway.
No, her.
Okay, fine.
It's not a noise. So it's not quiet, you're
At
saying.
the, so I will show pictures later of how these storage systems look like. They basically look like a shipping container. What the loud parts are about these are like HVACs to cool the batteries down, and inverters that are like collecting the energy and bumping it up to prepare to go into the grid. Those are the items at the
The
project that make
peacefulness that we are
Yes.
blessed with now, so your bottom line is just gonna be gone, correct?
That's what is in the Creo, yes. If I read an ordinance, it would probably not be this loud, I have to tell you. But it is the law, and any other noise requirement than this, enables the developer to go to the state.
And then 50 feet from our property line, that's where you wanna be?
Yes, 50 feet from a non-person.
That's the setback, so where's gonna be, it has to be a minimum of that. The setback is just a line to start from.
That is, yeah, minimum,
Are
yeah.
you willing to buy?
Yeah, we'll sell right now.
Bye.
Another,
There's a question over here.
So question, you
Thank
said
you.
before that you couldn't write the Creo to be more restrictive than the.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
So how can you write the Creo to be less than 55 dBA at the NP house?
It wouldn't be a Creo.
Then it would fail.
It would be a
So
workable,
that's the
potentially,
workable
it would be an ordinance that the developer might find workable.
But it gives them the option to go to the state and permit.
Yes.
I think this project is going through no matter what, anybody around here has to say. It's just who's gonna get the money.
And it is, if it happens,
It's not just who's
for
gonna get the
November
money, though.
29th,
It's who's going to get the money and who will be able to get some extra concession.
if the
That's not in the law.
developer is willing, if the developer is willing to work with the local government, they might not want to wait till November.
There's no constraint.
They might be flexible on these items, they might not be. There's a question over there.
To piggyback this, young lady's question noise-wise.
Yeah.
So like we hear the noise right now in the room, or we hear the items that are running. So in the distance of the 50 feet or whatever with those decimals, and you said you would write it not at that high of a level, how far from that shipping container, how many feet or miles are you hearing this item?
That depends entirely, so the way typically zoning
At that?
protects sound is through distance and through a noise limit. The they could be sound studies submitted with this that prove that at the house, it is not exceeding this. What else?
Is that 55 per unit or 55 for the whole site?
At your house, from the whole site radiating to your house.
Because I look at 55 decibels is like a dishwasher.
Yeah.
So,
At your house, though, exactly.
But
That's
is that
typically
55 decibels per unit or total?
total.
Yeah, the property.
Directly at the unit, it is 60 to 80 decibels, directly at the unit. But sound dissipates over space. The wind certainly has an impact on how loud it actually sounds. Okay, there's 3 more questions and then I'll continue.
Gone over so many things. Go ahead. I'll remember.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay, so how much is the permit for that company for Eagle? How much money is gonna bring to you guys?
I'm not Eagle.
No, but
And I don't know.
Eagle, but Eagle, but I mean, then you're basically, you're representing Eagle.
I'm not
So
representing Eagle.
what's the ticket for them to come in? Cause they have to pay Eagle to actually do anything. Cause there's wetlands over there, there's rattlesnakes, sanctuary, there's birds.
I do not know what the permits cost. But I want to
But
remind
that
you
could be-
that
that could
Eagle
be that
pays
could
the
be
community money.
Just take it back to Eagle and just say, thank you very much, because they're making money too.
I can tell you what typically happens on a piece of vacant property. If there's wetlands, and there are wetlands on one end of this piece of property,
What's this?
they have to do a professional wetlands designation. Typically in that, things like rattlesnakes and all those other issues come up, and then used to be the DNR, will make decisions whether or not it has a negative impact on it. It's like that when they do the roads.
And they'll issue setbacks. and
So
all that.
I had you guys, but you guys changed your names, it was a different name, blah, blah, blah. My house is on wetlands, but they wouldn't let me do anything more to fill in my property and then shut it down. But what's the difference over there? I didn't have that much money. It sounds like these people have billions of dollars to invest.
What typically happens, because I've looked at other parcels that have been bought commercially here and have some wetlands on them, they designate the part of the property that is a wetland and tell the owner of the property then, you can't touch within this area. And it's clearly marked on a drawing form that they can't go in and touch it. The other things about livestock, like snakes and like when they did paving on Groveland Road, they had to do a study because there's some bat that lives in the tree off the side of the road, and they thought they might have to cancel some paving because it might bother their nesting. They'll do that for rattlesnakes too on wetlands. But all of that gets done by somebody in Eagle, which used to be the DNR, as to whether or not you're interfering with some kind of an animal habitat, or whether or not you're messing, excuse me, the water resources there. They decide all of that, and they have to go through it, and it is expensive, but they have to pay for that.
Well, it sounds like this is like another step, and it's not, I'm sorry, I apologize, it's not your fault. You're doing a really good job.
I'm trying.
But it's not your problem. It has to go to a different level, and we're gonna have to, figure this one out. I wish I would've known about this the first meeting when they were here, and I would've tore that chick up.
You had a question, and then I would like to continue because we got lots to, we got more to cover, guys. And I don't wanna keep you here tonight.
I will try to be quick, but I'm hoping this might help assuage some of the concerns that people that did not attend the first meeting in June. This is something that was passed into law without giving anyone any consideration. None of us were involved. No one was allowed to be involved. This law was made, that's it. So we don't have a choice. It's not a, do we want this? It's coming. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, this 62 or 63 acre parcel, they're planning on doing this construction using 10 to 12 acres,
I
they
think it
thought,
was up to 12 acres.
in the center of the property, trying to mitigate as much of the sound and all that other stuff.
What about later on in the future?
Well,
Thank you.
actually, to your comments, the discussion I've had with them is, I have said, I think some of the distances, and these are what I talked to you about, are not adequate. I would suggest the way the property is situated, that the initial proposed possible site plan they showed me could be moved so that it would mitigate some of the noise issues by moving it farther away and closer to the expressway. Cause I know this lady didn't want me to say it, but I've done tons of DB meetings out here in Groveland Township over the years on different complaints. We have a professional DB gauge like the state uses, okay? And I know if you stand anywhere near I-75, the ambient noise level's about 72 or 3 dB, just from all the tire whine and stuff going by. So my suggestion was, can we move this farther away? Because I agree, 50 feet or 300 feet is inadequate in my opinion, and it would make it less objectionable to people. That, and I wanted to put a 50-acre requirement in there because it would eliminate a whole bunch of parcels that might otherwise qualify. So don't say we're doing this just for money. I am doing this because of exactly what you just said and what we've heard and what you can read for yourself in the Public Act. They passed the law. They didn't ask us. I had the state rep here last time who said, you people need to understand, it was passed strictly along partisan ballots. It was the Democrats versus the Republicans. They don't care what we think, it's law, and then he said point blank, right? You're going to get this. And I'm telling you, in talking to Vesper, at least I will say, in the discussions I've had with them so far, they have been pretty amenable to try and address for these issues. So it's at least If we have to have it, it's better. The solution you're suggesting is, we don't want it, so don't do anything and don't have it. Well, if we don't do anything and don't have it, she's told you, just like my state rep, they're gonna put it in. And the customers told me, the people of Vesper have said, we're gonna go to November and do it if we don't. We're going to get this. I don't like it. I didn't invite them. I don't agree with this philosophy, but I still have to obey the law. And that's what we're at right now. And I'm trying to do it to get as much benefit to our residents as we can out of it. It is that simple.
Bob? Bring up the size. Bob,
I'm sorry, who is
tell
that?
him to bring up the size.
I'll talk
We
about
can't-
size in just a second. I'll show a bunch of pictures and then.
Continue.
Over there. Continue. Because the power lines just taking more.
Thank you.
Is there a site plan gonna be proposed or shown to us?
I don't know.
Well, when they finalize whatever it is they want to do, because what they did when they first met with me, they said, here's kind of what we were thinking of doing, and I looked at it, and I said, I think you can move it. So after a couple of weeks, they came back and said, well, maybe we could do this, and I haven't had a sense to sit down with them and sit down, I think it's enough or not, but they've been amenable to discussing it. What has to happen, we're not circumventing or shortcutting any steps. If they actually get to the point where we think we have something that works, they will submit a formal site plan to the planning commission. It'll be a public meeting. You can come in and comment on it, and it has to go through the planning commission first. And that's why I have Liz, our planner, here, because I want her as aware of this as we are. You need to understand, there isn't a supervisor in the county that even knows as much about this now as I do, because I have spent 5 weeks trying to find out what is the law and what are the options. I've asked the supervisors at the last 2 luncheons. None of them have been approached on this. And the only other one even working remotely on this, if you read the week after I released the story to the Citizen, was Brandon, who said, we're trying to do something too, because we want to get some changes in before it becomes law. That's the only thing we can do. I don't like it, but it's not going to do us any good to say, I don't like it, we're going to do nothing, because we're going to get nothing then.
I'm going to speed through some of these, not because I'm trying to avoid further questions, but because you have already asked so many good questions that we already addressed some of these things. I already told you that the MPSC standards, whatever they will be at the end, will largely determine how state siting works, and that will have implications probably as to how local siting works as well. It is not clear, and I don't know if you know that, Bob, probably you know, that it is not clear whether you can set limitations on districts in a CREO. Our conservative interpretation is that you cannot. The MPC is currently assessing how far they might, or like the law kind of is a little ambiguous about whether or not land use, like existing land uses or even future land uses could be considered through the state process. And then we don't know if screening or landscaping, which are typical zoning items, are included in the CREO. Our conservative guess is no.
Well, and typically what I saw, most of the stuff that I got forwarded, I think from you and from the township's attorney, was that they tend to think these should be cited on agricultural pieces of property as a special use permit. And that's, for us in Groveland, REF, rural estate farm, is what almost the entire township, except for the recreational property that the county and the DNR has, is this dominant zoning almost everywhere.
Yep. Let's talk about a workable ordinance, a WIO. It is not really meeting the standards in 2268, but it may be something any or your developer or whoever might be willing to work with. It could mirror the MPSC standards, and that's why it's so important that the MPSC releases their final guidance on this. You could also maybe ask for more. How to tell? It all depends on every individual developer. What one developer might find doable, another developer might not find doable. And because you cannot claim CREO status, they can go to the state. So it is the practical point of how much can you pack into a WIO entirely depends on the point, the practical point for the developer at which the project does not, or is not viable anymore. For wind and solar, that is a little easier to figure out where really, how can we tell what a WIO, what can we all ask for in a WIO? For wind and solar, Eagle, I have to give a shout out to Eagle, has pulled together for all of the operational wind and solar projects in Michigan that are running, has looked at what did the ordinance say? What was doable for developers in the past and for local governments? They have this data, I think it's in the process of being put on their website, and I'm happy to share the link afterwards. For storage, since there is no operational utility scale storage in Michigan, we don't know. I have been drafting a guidebook for local governments explaining what are best. Basically what I'm presenting today in a written form. And then a sample zoning ordinance. I was working on this all of last summer, all of last fall, and then the law changed. Before the law changed, I actually sent my draft to municipal attorneys, to professional planners, to fire experts, to the state fire marshal, to a bunch of folks, and also to developers. And they have given me feedback. I was trying to incorporate this, then the law changed, everything is chaos. And I have been pausing this work on this guide because it is really tricky to tell what is workable and how the situation of the law is. It really depends on each individual developer. So if you have a developer that is willing to work with you, that is helpful to get a sense for what's workable for both of you. This is a lot of zoning and law, and now I want to talk about batteries, because that's why we're here. All right, what type of batteries are we talking about? We're not talking about those little Tesla power walls that people can put in their garage and pair with their rooftop solar or charge their EV. We're talking about like literal batteries, lithium-ion batteries, that are put together on racks, stacked together into something that looks, I call it a shipping container. Developers don't like when I say this, but it's practically how a shipping container looks. And it has some HVAC units on it. It sits typically on a concrete foundation, and typically, because there are some codes and fire risk associated with this, typically it's a gravel site, so much for the visual impacts. Here, this is a substation with basically these in the building, so they look like a warehouse. I have to say though that most recent BESS that I have seen are not in this dedicated use building, they are in the enclosures that look like this. So when we look at larger projects, this is one just this week, a few days ago.
See it all over.
DTE announced that they are planning a 220 megawatt BESS on their former coal plant at the train channel or coal plant. And this is a rendering, this is not an actual picture. It will be, they plan to finish construction in 2026, but just for some scales. This is the scale that we're talking about. This is 220, the largest BESS, I would call them BESS, battery energy storage system, is in California, which is on the site of a former natural gas plant. So they have some containers here, they have some containers on this side, and that is very handy for them because all of the electrical infrastructure is already there. All the, like the substation, all the transmission infrastructure is right there.
You
And it's a good use of
You talking 40-foot containers, or when you say container?
Yeah.
How big a container?
There are dimensions in the code, which I don't have off the top
Probably
of my head.
53 feet.
9 feet, like,
No, they're
they're not really bigger than
they're
this.
highways that are 20 foot long, essentially. Because the 40 footers are too heavy.
Here's a project that is where storage is co-located with solar panels, sometimes called a hybrid project. But more so, we see developers in Michigan being a little bit more so interested in these standalone projects where, am I explaining this? I guess I'm explaining this. Where basically power is being, you can't place these anywhere technically. It doesn't have to be next to wind or solar or natural gas. You can just place them next to a substation and then they charge when there's excess energy on the grid, and then releases it back into the grid when the need for it is there. You are not the only community that's being looked at for storage. In fact, there are more than 70 projects. I pulled this map yesterday. So this map is from myself. Mid-continent independent system operator. Any developer or utility that wants to build an electrical project needs to apply with myself. They're basically managing the grid, not only in Michigan, also Kentucky, Louisiana, to see, and the developer or MISO checks whether there's space on the grid. This is a process that takes several years. Developers get their spot in the queue because then it will take time. So usually conversations with landowners happen first, then they get their foot in the door into MISO just to make sure not all of these projects get realized. For example, because maybe the landowner doesn't agree, or it is too expensive to hook into that particular substation or point of interconnection, or what these dots symbolize. Obviously this is not Michigan, but we see they are kind of in the lower half of the mitten. There are also projects that are being considered that are hybrid. I mentioned these are mostly paired. I think all of them are paired with solar.
That first picture that you just went by, was that all the batteries, or what was it? What-
These are all projects that developers are considering. Not all of these will be built.
Are they batteries, or are they?
Those are all batteries, yes. There are different storage technologies too. We have, maybe some of you have been to Ludington before. There's a pumped hydro storage facility which pumps water from the lake into a reservoir and then releases it back, which is a hydro dam. But the projects, more than 90% of the projects that are storage in the US are lithium-ion batteries, which are all of these gray dots. All right, where is best possible? The basic only requirement is grid access. That is why they're considering the project by the transmission line where there's a substation. They need to feed into the transmission infrastructure when they're this large. They prefer, typically, land that's cleared and flat, and that really makes much of Michigan viable because of how small of a footprint these systems have compared to wind or compared to solar. From a developer's perspective, what plays a role is the cost of land and the cost of taxes in each particular location. And there is an opportunity for brownfield redevelopment. So some of the projects that I've shown you before, like the DTE project, the big one in California, those are on brownfields. Those are in former industrial sites that have been closed and are now being reused for something new. But there are limitations as to, like, is there contamination in the ground? What implications does that have on, like, safety? So brownfields are possible, and suburban communities are interested in invest in brownfields, but it is not the default for many developers because of the limitations that may come with brownfields. How big are these? I've shown you pictures. The average of what's in the MISO queue, the map with all the gray dots, the average project size of 150 megawatts. I am a solar and wind, or I'm not a solar and wind person, but that's what I've mostly worked on in recent years. And for a megawatt of solar, you have around 5 to 10 acres. Easier to count, or most modern projects are 10 acres per megawatt. These best projects are super small comparatively, and like the average project size of 150 megawatts would then translate to something around 5 to 15 acres. The biggest projects in the queue, did I say that anywhere? Yes, are 500. There's one project that's a 500 megawatt in the queue, but on average.
So out of the 63 acres, how much land would they use for these?
They have suggested that it was going to be around 10 to 12 acres.
So the storage yard where these containers are on is this small, but they would have, like, in this particular case that you described, like land around it free.
But couldn't they expand once they get established there? Couldn't they
That was
just
your
expand?
question, and I appreciate that you brought this back up. The developer needs to think about what, like, for financial planning, they are limited as to what they can put on the grid depending on what the substation can handle and how much traffic there is already on that transmission infrastructure. That is what this MISO process is for, to basically check how much water can we push into the bucket that the grid is. And that caps them. They can't, and sometimes I get the question, oh, maybe in 5 years they will add to it. They probably won't be able to add to it because they will have done their calculations in a way to, like, use as much as they can put into that point of interconnection, into that substation, And that's what their financial modeling is all based on. They will unlikely expand this a bunch a couple of years down the line because that would not make much financial sense.
But in fairness, I read stuff that said a lot of the companies that put Vestas in say that if you think about when you charge your cell phone, I know when I got it, it would go 3 days on the charge. Now I'm getting about a day, okay? So there is some loss in efficiency, and I mean, they've said that at some point in time, and I read this in a couple places,
Yep.
reading the stuff I got, that they may add some batteries to kind of supplement the normal drainage
Yes.
that goes on them.
Yes.
But I told them that if you wanted to make it bigger, you either make it the size you wanted at the beginning and get it approved or not, or you come back and do another site plan, because we would do that
Yep.
to any other business. When they say, I'm gonna
Yep.
double the size of my business, great, give me a new site plan, and then it goes through the fire department and everybody else to get reviewed.
Yeah, so let me tell you about the developer, the batteries lose juice, for sure, over time. So some developers may overbuild. They apply for more containers than and to basically in 30 years still have that maximum output, so they're making efficient use of that substation connection. Some add containers over time, but usually what then the site plan review would be basically the final stage of development. So we've had a developer has told me before that they would basically lay all of the foundations, but don't put the enclosure, the container on it yet, but only add to it over time to kind of maintain the output. So this is what developers also call this augmentation. Three more questions, and then I continue. Yes.
That was covered at the other meeting that we
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
This was very specific. I asked that question, they said, no, we're going to only do 10-ish
Yeah.
acres. And the conversation was that they would put it roughly in the middle of the picture that they showed there.
Yeah.
Cause there's a small lake there, they were gonna situate it in the middle. And if Bob wants to push it over to the expressway.
The second one I saw, they
sense.
wanted to push it over and.
But the other thing that they said was that it was only gonna be 10 acres. The impression was that it was gonna be 10 acres for a long time, and that there's not going to be any solar panels or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is what,
I believe her name.
Jessica said. But all of that stuff, because I made it clear from the beginning, all these discussions are positive to this extent, but it's like any other thing you're doing. Until we get to the point where we actually agree on stuff, and somebody puts it in writing, and it's in the site plan, and that's what gets approved, it's just talk.
And you had mentioned to me before, putting into the ordinance basically any expansion of the footprint would trigger
A
a
site plan.
whole new application to avoid that it's just like growing.
Can I ask about that though?
Yes.
I know that they're, oh, that's funny, you're gonna have a hard time.
We're gonna have another two.
They're looking at the church, to buy that church, that abuts to their property.
The river?
The river, thank you, I was gonna say hillside, the river. So if they do that, they're already thinking of expansion. But let's say, November comes, the ordinances from the state are in effect, and next year sometime they decide we're gonna expand. Well, you no longer can really, how does that work?
Well, if it's on the same site, and it's in Groveland Township, I said, they'll have to come back to the Groveland Township Planning Commission for site expansion.
But
The
would
property
they-
you're talking about. from
Would
the-
they really, though? It's a different property number.
Wait, no, they're not talking about expanding into the river. I said, this piece of property, just so everybody's clear, one side, it has the power line and a huge piece of DNR property, okay? On the north side, it butts up to I-75. On the east side, it butts up to that property that's before you get to the River Church.
Yeah.
And I said, both the supervisor in Springfield and I have been contacted because our understanding is the River Church is selling that property after the church that butts up to this piece, to these two guys that wanna make a sand and gravel mine. Now, I haven't had an actual application again, so I don't tell the whole world, cause it's a discussion at this point.
But isn't that part of that lucky company too?
Sorry,
No, that piece
nobody
isn't
will
letting
find
go.
out.
This is two other guys, they're independent, they wanna put a gravel pit there, so I said, On the one side, they would have potentially a gravel pit if it goes in. On the north, they have I-75. On the other side, they have the ITC corridor and a huge tract of land. The houses that are closest to it are the ones that are on the southern border where we meet Springfield. And I said that, I think it was 67.
You have a question, you have a question? And then you have a very quick question, and then I'll continue.
Then wait, since before his hand was.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So where's the closest substation? I hear about the substation a lot here, so what's the closest substation? Cause I don't feel there's not one behind us.
They have to build it. It's
Well,
part,
that's-
it's part
There is
of
no
the land
substation.
disturbance.
So that was
Yeah.
like not even told right there, so they have to put a substation to connect to the power out there.
They actually call it a switching station.
Okay, so then my other question is, too,
Yeah.
what kind of taxes do we get out of this? Because I know the church doesn't pay anything.
You are foreshadowing my next slide. Can I pause you? I'll talk about taxes in just a second. Is that okay?
Basically for the county.
Cool. Okay.
$2 million
I want to
is
go back
nothing.
to what you were originally talking about in that slide, that's when my hand went up.
Yeah.
You were originally talking about space and acres, and this gentleman in the blue shirt, I wanted to piggyback because that's where my question was.
Yep.
So at the last meeting, Vesper representative stated that it maxed out at 380 some, but they were gonna clear 12 acres, and I heard what Bob was saying about moving it and so forth. I don't know if I can 100% remember my question now after all the discussion. It's not the greatest time in my life.
Don't worry, remember in the middle of the night when you wake up, right?
So in any case, as you're looking at this, maybe I wrote it down, let me see, because I got like both of those. But the question becomes, and it was in something that you stated about future builds and writing the ordinance and things. Do you remember what your last statements were before all this questions ensued?
About space requirements?
It was on space requirements, yes, because it was after decimals, it was on space and so forth.
I don't know what you remember I said. One thing that I just want to highlight again is that the point of interconnection, like the substation that will be there, that will realistically cap how much they can put into the grid. And they're not going to build a substation and after 5 years, like, that is expensive. So they can't just add batteries over the next 30 years. They are limited to what the grid can, like the size of the highway onto the grid at that
That's
point.
my question.
Yeah.
Lithium batteries are the way to go currently. All right.
Currently, yes.
But this is a 2028, 2029 project. Lithium batteries weren't the way to go in the past.
Yeah.
And we have technology developing all the time.
Yeah.
So my question is, if those lithium batteries, and we're talking about the possibility here of how the ordinance will be written, is there any possibility to write in that ordinance that when technology changes, if lithium batteries no longer are the qualified, most beneficial, and they die like our phone batteries, how do we still make sure that that property is beneficial to Groveland Township as a whole, if you guys are going for this? And it's not just some facility left, and where's it disposed of? Where do those lithium batteries go? Because eventually, stuff happens. I mean, you can have leaks, you can have fires. How do we protect this area?
So they're hazardous material. They're not gonna go onto the landfill. They're going to be subject to like hazardous waste management.
I'm
This
sure
is-
that's the same thing they do with the
How do we
PCBs
ensure
and the
that?
transformers that are in the telephone lines.
There is ongoing research of how to make recycling, like how to best and most economically recycle these things, which of the materials can be reused, how to appropriately handle the remaining ingredients. That is something that is, the technology itself is developing super quick, and the recycling associated with it is developing super quick as well. But I can tell you, it will not end up on your landfill or in a landfill because it is hazardous waste, which is subject to like very strict like waste management
I'm
rules.
concerned about it being abandoned, to be totally honest.
If it gets abandoned, then there is something called decommissioning, which traditional zoning ordinances and also PA 233 thought about including decommissioning standards. There are certain, basically, if it doesn't store power for a while, decommissioning kicks in. If it gets abandoned and it's not in safe condition, decommissioning kicks in. Which decommission means remove all of the parts. And there's usually money, or there is money set aside for decommissioning at the beginning. The developer pays money into a pot to make sure so that in 30 years or in 5 years, if they go bankrupt, who knows,
Kind of like
that there
an
is
escrow.
money available to take that all away again.
The language I saw actually had it as an escrow account rather than a bond, so there's actually some money set aside on a schedule that they had set up.
And it includes too, and this is the Michigan Public Service Commission also views it this way, that this amount of money should be reviewed every couple of years to make sure that just because the decommissioning cost in 2024 is amount X, that that same amount of money gets adjusted if necessary if recycling becomes more or less expensive, so that in whenever the project's end of life is, that then there is an appropriate amount of funding available to have the decommissioning kick in and to have things removed.
So because, real fast, so if, in understanding your response, if in the ordinance it's written to make sure that that's all taken care of and handled the way you described.
Yep.
What happens if, and this goes to the township board as well, what happens if there is a new technology or something new? Will that fall under the, they have to reordinance it?
Typically, you can't do that to people on any kind of business. You have, those are made based on economic decisions where they say the new battery's 3 times as good as the old one and they'll take that out. I don't know of any business where we can go to anybody and say, you know, you can make bricks cheaper than you used to make them, or bag concrete cheaper than you used to make it. You have to put the new technology in.
Right
I
now,
don't know how you
batteries
do
are
that.
so expensive, they're not going to just take them out in 5 years because that would ruin their financial plan. They're going to have these batteries going until
Depreciation life, yeah.
there is no more juice in them, to say that colloquially.
Look at this guy over here.
There is, besides the like expansion of footprint, triggering a new application, also the thought of saying if like there's repairs necessary and the developer would like replace a part with like a brand new battery chemistry, then you may think about if it's possible to include that in an ordinance as well, to say if there are significant changes to the technology, that should also trigger a new application altogether, because it might have different
Fire
sound
prevention might be
impacts or
different.
fire prevention. So there are ways you can go about this as well.
Yeah, going from lithium to sodium, the batteries aren't as efficient, so they may have to scale up the size, which I would think would then trigger a reason.
But they have figured out, usually they know from the get-go, this is on average how the effectiveness of the battery goes down. So they're like planning for this and applying for this from the get-go. Can I move on after this question?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
So actually, part of my job for one of my past employers is doing something called due diligence. And so I want to make sure I'm understanding with you correctly what you're trying to convince us of. So one of your previous slides showed that, yeah, we have these batteries and we have these windmills on this side, we have these solars on this side, we have all these things going on.
Yep.
So you're gonna tell me or want me to believe that a company is going to invest in 65 acres of property, knowing they're only ever gonna use 12.
Right.
That makes no business sense. Like, I wasn't born yesterday. Were I born yesterday? You know?
Yeah.
They were supposed to be. That's because it's, according to what Vesper said last time, it's because that's the max that the lines allow. Now, if the lines change.
I mean, the property now.
I know, but what I'm saying is they can only do so much storage based upon the lines above. So if the lines change, then you could expand.
Yeah, or what else did they put in?
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, yeah.
Technology.
Can we move on? One more question, guys. Yes.
So I did one of these containers back in Pennsylvania in 2011, but with something called lead and carbon batteries, which are very much like a lead acid battery.
Mhm.
That company went bankrupt like 2 years after we made one of these containers.
Yep.
My question is, why do we need these now versus say in the late 90s when we didn't have to worry about frequency regulation or sharing or saving energy in a certain time? I mean, power plants were able to regenerate, change their, output within like 15 minutes.
You can also turn on a natural gas plant much quicker than you can turn on the sun. When we have more and more renewable energy on the grid, these systems help with basically balancing when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. It doesn't always match the energy demand at the time. But I also want to tell you that in the 70s, they built this Ludington pump storage facility because it was more efficient to keep the nuclear power plant going all night, even though no one is using power in the night, and basically use that excess nuclear power to charge, you know, to like pump the water.
That's a good question. Why don't we have more nuclear plants?
Why we don't have more nuclear
Yeah,
plants?
that's the answer, get rid of this battery.
Something I did not include in my presentation today, but that I usually always include, is I talk about integrated resource plans. The utilities, DTE and consumers, they always have to report every couple of years to the Michigan Public Service Commission how they plan to keep the lights on affordably. And it is based on their economic models. Consumers and DTE say more renewables and storage makes financial sense because the costs of those are predictable. You build a wind park, you build a solar farm, and then the cost of that is the price of fossil fuels. And I am from Germany. I grew up in Germany. I came to the US 2 years ago, and the war in Ukraine made European gas prices go crazy. And that is something that you don't have the risk of with solar. So that is why it makes financial sense for the utilities to rely on them. And they have goals, not because the state government tells them to, but because it makes economic sense for them.
I don't believe you.
Can I ask one question? You said you came from Ukraine, from the war. So does something like this big in our backyard equal a terrorist target? Because if it's a big energy ban in the biggest blanket, why wouldn't you want to destroy it? Why wouldn't you want to get it?
All right.
Can we just finish the presentation?
Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Is everyone on board?
Yeah, no more questions. Come on,
You guys wanna go home, I know. Okay, I have a summary, and we have talked a lot about all these things. We've talked about environmental impacts, we have talked about sound. We haven't really talked about visual impacts, but I showed you pictures that show you how these things typically look like. I do want to shout out the local benefits too, and we have had a question about taxes. It is, compared to wind and solar, an incredibly tiny footprint. Like yesterday, I toured a 1,700 acre solar farm in Calhoun County. There's a 2,000 acre solar farm in Wausau, Assembly Solar, which is the largest solar farm in Michigan. These things are small, and they bring lots of big tax payments. The caveat that I'm giving you is that there is no formal guidance by the state tax commission of how to tax them. We've been in touch with them a couple of years ago, and they said it's probably, I mean, they are subject to personal property tax, and they're likely to be taxed as utility personal property. The matter of fact is that there's no clear guidance for assessors on like how to tax them.
So if you buy a piece of property for $1 million, how is it gonna get taxed?
Well, first of all, the assessor by law can't chase sale prices, so if they bought it for $1 million and I'm just giving you an example, and it was assessed at 300,000, they're not gonna be able to raise it to $1 million, they'll raise it to something.
But if I bought something for $1 million, it seems like it goes up.
Well, it does, because every time it changes ownership, the cap comes off whatever the next
Right,
assessor.
so that's what I'm saying right now with that property. So whatever, I'm just throwing a number, $1 million. So whatever, when Michael bought that piece of property, he bought it at he's had it for 20-something years.
I suppose.
And he's paying very low tax on it, so I wanna know, especially for, Groveland Township, how much money is coming into this township?
They will take whatever he's taxed, and if he's owned it and it's under the Michigan Headley cap, when the utility or investor would buy it,
Actually, it should be more.
it will come uncapped to whatever that number is.
Because now he's putting a building on it. so
And
that's
then they would
something
add tax for whatever building.
That would be like a resident.
It's basically, they look at what's on the property in December, and that's what it gets
Being a
taxed.
commercial piece of property should be more than a residential. That's what
Well,
I'm just
yeah,
like-
and again, you're asking me,
I know.
the assessors have rules they have to follow, and they do it, and Just like you, if I think my taxes are wrong, I go and appeal.
So no more utility bills, right?
No.
Does it affect us
For all Groveland Township?
Bill, this thing? Any benefit of?
Usually, no.
I think the only way you could see it, and it's a tricky thing, because I don't know that anybody's bill goes down. I think the assumption by the utility companies is probably making power this way is cheaper than some other ways. It might still be more than we're paying today, but it might be cheaper than what the other alternatives
This
are.
is not making power.
Well, no, but what it does do, basically the principle behind it, you can see, is if I take power off when you're not using it, and take that and store it, and put it back in when you need it, I don't need to make as big a power plant theoretically, because now I have to pay power set in the storage battery. So I think the biggest advantage to a utility company on this has to be that it forestalls the necessary need to make a bigger or a larger plant. And bigger or larger plants, I think, take 10 to 15 years to get site approval and built, and these can be done in a couple of years, so it fills the need for electricity. But I certainly wouldn't say you're gonna end up getting it cheaper. You might get it cheaper than something else, but I don't believe it's gonna be cheaper than what it is today.
There are, for the utilities, there are several benefits to these. I know that Consumers is currently having under, or a project is being commissioned in Standish right now, where there is old grid infrastructure, and Consumers is putting a very small storage facility there to basically extend the life of that infrastructure there at the moment, so that they don't have to make an immediate investment, but they can basically,
Get by with it.
get by for a little bit longer. So there's several things, okay, I'm jumping all over the place because of your questions. Grid resilience. It doesn't, when there's a storm, just because you're hosting a project, doesn't mean there is an exclusive grid benefit to you. Overall, this project will contribute to grid reliability in the state of Michigan, but not specifically to Groveland.
Yeah, can you talk about that though, just so everyone knows? My understanding is they basically take this energy that we're hosting here and they sell it to the highest bidder. They have companies that do that. So, just so everyone knows, this doesn't stay here. So when we lose our electricity, this isn't for us. It doesn't work that way, and I think people misunderstand that.
I like to explain it this way. There is a big bucket called the energy grid, the grid. A power plant, a wind turbine, they pour water into the bucket, and every house connected to the bucket takes water. And if it's that drop that was stored in Groveland Township, maybe doesn't travel, like, it gets into one pot from which everyone takes their energy. And usually electrons travel as little as they go, but there is no way to say our energy will be surveying Detroit. That is not how it works.
That's the only way they can utilize the system though. It'd be too hard to try and say, well, you just get this piece here, and you get this piece there. They put it in, and based on how much you take out, you pay for it.
Well, I can tell you, well, if I got it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Next to the tax payments, so best are largely economic.
And
the
I'm sure
benefits
that's for
of
what-
best
Common sense, that's basically how it's gonna work.
are
We're just selling.
largely economical. Next to the tax payments, there is the one-time payment. It's either, if it's cited through the state, $2,000 per megawatt once the host community award, or if it's done locally, either through a CREO or a workable ordinance, it is $5,000 per megawatt, which makes the difference, or which would be $1.5 million one-time payment at the beginning of a project. There are
It's not actually at the beginning, it's half when they start construction, and half when the system goes live and gets certified that it's operational.
Right, but relatively at the beginning of this whole project, it's not only a 30 years. There is landowner payments from solar. We know that for a solar farm, an acre of ag land goes for about $1,400 an acre. We have no idea how that looks like for storage in Michigan, because we don't have it.
You $1,400 an acre to buy it?
To lease it.
Oh, to lease it, okay.
There are some jobs associated with like the construction of it. But there is typically the storage projects that I've seen, and maybe Vesper spoke to this a little bit, is in how far there is like, usually there's not an office building associated with this. There's like 24-hour like, supervision from remote, and there are things in place that someone can be here in the case of an emergency, but there's not that there's like an office building or that there's a ton of jobs associated with this in the community. Right?
I don't know where they physically monitor it, but they said they have people that respond to the alarms.
Yeah.
Within about a half hour, and our chief said, well, we'll be there way before that, which is why we asked them, when you get an alarm, I want you to call 911, because that's how our fire department gets the dispatch, and we'll be there long before you get there.
There are several safety
Call me.
mechanisms of this for that in place, but I just wanted to like touch on the jobs part of it. Grid resilience, you talked about it, it helps the overall grid. There are visual impacts, sound impacts, environmental impacts are, during normal operations, there are no environmental impacts on the site. In case of an emergency, there may be, and we will get about, like, I understand you're upset about some of this. We haven't talked about fire and exposure risk yet.
Hiroshima.
During normal operation, there is no groundwater contamination, but if there is an emergency, obviously, a structural fire too, a regular household fire also brings with it gases and nasty things, and so do these things as well.
What about our water? We're all on wells. What about contamination from the leaks?
There is like a gel, a liquid electrolyte in these, but it's not running out when you puncture the enclosure. It is so little. The only problem that you have with like groundwater contamination is when you use water for firefighting, because then that makes it travel. But best practice is that you don't even touch these things because you can't put them down with fire.
Would you like to buy my place?
Investor does provide all the training to the fire departments, the emergency personnel.
That's all.
They provide, and it's continuing
Every
training,
year.
correct?
Every year. And I've asked them that if this site is approved, I think they need to do both Groveland and Springfield.
Yes.
Again, I have been very upfront with everybody that could be involved in this from our office.
You guys, we almost made it.
You gotta do-
Okay. I do want to, I'm not a chemist. There's a question.
I just wanted to make one statement there about the electrolyte.
Yep,
It's not necessarily gonna be the gel type.
okay.
There is a new type, and you had a picture of it on one of those large scale ones. And it's a pumped electrolyte type. And on the large ones, that's what they're going to.
You pump like antifreeze would be or something?
The electrolyte is actually pumped, it's an ion pump or something like that, I don't remember what
I
they
was
call
just
it.
curious. I haven't heard.
But so, there is a risk associated with that, and that really, you know, that's why I'm really interested in what technology they're looking at using here. So it was noted, we're all on wells. That stuff gets in our groundwater, we're screwed.
I appreciate your.
And I've worked, yeah, so, and I've worked with these things, and if the fire happens during rainfall, the electrolyte, when it combines with water, creates hydrofluoric acid. Highly toxic. The other thing is, there's a lot of byproducts when these, the battery cells, packs, whatever, are subjected to water. And that's, my biggest thing is secondary containment. We need to make sure we have secondary containment. The substation will have it, these batteries have to.
Well,
We need to
partial
protect
answer
our
to your
water.
question is, they made a statement, I think, at the last meeting, Vesper being named, that they actually use a lot of different batteries, and they don't even decide that till about 4 or 5 years down the process, so we
But they've
wouldn't
also
know.
never done one like this, you know.
But I mean, I'm just saying, so we
big
wouldn't
switch
know
battery.
what's gonna go in at day one on the site plan approval, but I discussed it with her a little bit today too. We're gonna check, but I think those kinds of issues will probably be under EPA decisions, because typically, when people have things like that, our activity, and Chief, are you still here?
Yep. Yeah.
I think basically, when we go into a location that has something that's hazardous, we record that on the sheet for that site, don't we? So that we know that if something happens, what we should do with it. And I'm guessing the EPA will probably have those same concerns you have, and tell us what we need to do. But I'm being honest with you, I don't think Vesper could tell us today And they said, we don't even know
No,
what kind of
because
battery.
we're 4 years out. I
Yeah,
mean,
so, to answer your question is, I think that gets all fixed through the normal EPA kind of thing.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate your comments, and I will look into this, and I will also double check whether this EPA
There.
is true, or like what is in place for this.
developing
We have in our, something that I have, something that we thought about too, is basically containment, like a seal underneath the container area. For example, in the case of rain, I don't know how workable a developer would find this.
Yeah, I know, that's been the discussion, there's no way to do it, kind of have, creating a bowl situation, you constantly gotta
To
drink.
basically collect whatever liquid.
Well, usually you do something like that. and you have
Isn't that a bondable thing though too?
water flow.
I mean, we have
Rubber
EPA
lining,
rules,
you get
and we
pumped out
know
there,
that
figure out
these,
That's, I mean, I think it becomes a
just
positive
as you
from
did for
rainwater.
the cleanup or the decommissioning, you can bond the amount of money to deal with these remediation.
Yeah.
There should be money set in for that.
Yeah.
Right. So it starts with
That's my
Small one, yes.
Hopefully. You passed by that environmental thing very quickly, the first one, you said there was no, danger to water. But what about soil and air? Are those potentially safe?
What I
with
stressed
normal
was during
environment?
normal operation.
Right, during normal operation.
There is a lot of potential for future research on this, and there is a lot of research being done on it.
So like.
Which is an unsatisfying response, I know.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Eagles, what they call it now.
So that's what they are now?
Eagles.
It's not DQ?
That's right, they don't call it that anymore, it's the same group.
Why'd they get rid of it?
All right.
Every time a new governor comes in, they change the name of it, it's had 3
Okay,
or 4.
I'm gonna skip, I'm not, I don't wanna skip something, because I don't want you to think I'm like brushing things under the rug. With BESS, there is a risk of thermal runaway, that's the #1 safety risk, which is when batteries get too hot and basically self-perpetuate themselves into very hot levels. Explosions can happen, fires can happen. A couple of years ago, when these things were brand new, they were incidents, people got injured. Since then, there has been a lot of learning from these past incidences, and these incidents are rare. They can happen, yes, but they are rare. The codes are catching up on this really quickly. Firefighting techniques are catching up to this really quickly. Back in the day, they put water on them, they opened the containers. Now we know to let it burn, which also doesn't sound like a satisfactory response. It's the best way to contain the fire and have everyone be safe. There have been incidences in the past, but they have all been safe incidences.
But on that, right, I agree.
Yep.
They don't try to suppress the fire, they let it burn. You have houses within distance, too close a distance, and it's heavily wooded. Groveland Township has a great fire department, but there's no way they're gonna be able to handle it in the woods. Once the trees start catching on fire, everyone's house is surrounded by trees, houses are gonna burn if there's a fire that they can't control or suppress.
The fire chief addressed that, maybe he's right there.
We would, just like we would do anything else, on a brush fire or anything else, we would call automatic mutual aid. As soon as we say, yeah, we got a fire, I mean, all the surrounding departments, I mean,
They're at my house.
we'll be there. The village hotel, I think we had 28 departments there when that hotel was.
But you have good access, you're not gonna have good access.
All we need is a road.
But the biggest part is the wind, where the wind's going, it's actually, it's gonna go
Any
across
fire,
75, so.
but backs up.
Technically,
Most of the others are crossing
We've lived there for many years, the wind is always been best.
There are several things in place. I'm glad that you are here, and I'm glad that this relationship is established to have the fire expert on board with this. NFPA 855, which you should require in your ordinance, and which the law requires for state processing CREOs, is the leading standard for installation of stationary energy storage systems. And it's not just for installation, or to make sure that we're using the right parts. It also requires planning and training so that local first responders are prepared. In PA 233, the state process actually requires from the developer an emergency and a fire response plan made in consultation with local first responders to ensure that they're like the things that they like, the evacuation routes, all of the details of the plans are doable by the locals. there are regular reviews of plans, and that is something that has been the most recent, like, revelation to people working in this space, is that annual site-specific training drills with emergency first responders at the expense of the project owner are helpful, so that if there's turnaround in the fire department, if there is only voluntary firefighters, that is taken care of and the locals are prepared. Also, what I saw, noticed again today in the law too, is that developers who go through the state process need to provide analysis of whether these plans can be fulfilled by existing local emergency response capacity, or if there's equipment needs or training needs, so that the locals are prepared that in the worst case scenario, they can take care of this. In NFPA 855, there's also the requirement for a developer to submit a commissioning plan, an emergency operations plan, which again, it contains that training, and it has a mitigation analysis. These are all things that you can ask for in a zoning ordinance to be compliant for the developer to prove that they're complying with code, to address all of these concerns that we talked about. And there's another question.
Small one, I
Small.
promise.
Promise.
What year of 855?
That is a very good question, and I think I would.
What'd you say? I'm sorry. didn't you-
What year of NFPA 855
Oh, I don't know.
was referenced in?
It's, the most recent version, which I think is currently 2023. They're currently working on a new one, 2026. Someone is assisting me, no, someone else, okay. And the Public Service Commission, their current proposal is to basically always use the most recent version of the code at the time of application. Because there are
I ask
significant.
because we don't adopt codes very quickly here in Michigan,
Right, right.
you know, so.
And that's why, like, requiring the most recent version also makes sure that since there are these technology jumps, the codes jump pretty far too every time. So always referring to the most recent code is the way to go. Okay, I have a bottom line and then I have my final slide. Yes?
I have a question concerning the fire. Okay, this is an area where there is no city water. When the Holly Hotel went up, we had city water coming into it. All these fire departments coming. So my question is, you've got 62 acres, maybe 30 acres there that will have forest. Plus you're surrounding rural people, I mean, people in neighborhoods. Will you have enough tanker trucks full of water to fight that, no matter how many come in?
The
I
tanker
have
trucks
no knowledge
is
of that.
on automatic mutual aid, so I don't even have to call for them. If we say we have a fire, tankers start showing up all the time. We've proved that we could fight the fire at Mount Holly and put that out with tankers, so, that's not
So
a
you
big
just-
deal.
How many days was that, Bill?
It was just one day, but
Okay. The
one
one
of
in
the suggestions,
California is going
if
at
I
20
can, one of the
days.
suggestions we're gonna request is that they put in a 300 gallon per minute well there. We can't force them, I don't think, but that's one of the suggestions.
NFPA 55 is a lot of authority to the local fire experts, so it is fantastic that you are on top of this and involved.
Could that linear gas be used to do some?
I want to summarize 2 hours of presentation. Battery storage is an economic development opportunity. I'm going to skip the resilience because that is not necessarily being felt here. It is a high investment. The developer invests lots of money on a very small footprint associated with the tax, with the grant money. There are safety concerns. There are visual changes. They can be addressed. At least these are addressed in the code. These used to be addressed through zoning. Again, in a workable ordinance. Also, if it's a very wooded area, like screening is less of an issue. I have teased it before. I am trying to find out what the best practices and what the best advice is for local governments. The legal changes have really been keeping me very busy to try to figure out what is best guidance, and it is a moving target. And with that, I want to thank you for 2 hours of your attention.
Thank you.
For all your questions. I'm going to stay.
For the fire department, please.
Okay.
A final request that I'd like to make publicly is that if there's a fire, it's not just a fire, it is a thermal event. And if there is a thermal incident, that battery, those lithium-ion batteries, may release some flammable electrolyte, as this gentleman indicated. But also there could be various flammable toxic gases that also emit into the air, which somebody asked about. Some of them could be hydrogen, methane, carbon monoxide, and hydrofluoric acid. So do your homework. We need to know, because you use that word protect, Bob, and I'm holding you as supervisor to protecting us, because this is coming in effect. My biggest concern is our gem is protected. There's several of us, sounds like, that are here today that live right over there. We don't
Now,
live
now
there.
you understand why, from the very beginning, I've gone to great lengths to get it out to the public, and that my concern has been, how do we make it as safe as possible? Because I didn't think some of the rules that I saw in the preliminary draft were as strong as they should be, and that's why she and I had a discussion earlier. I'm sure we'll have one later, but that's exactly what we're doing. I just don't like it when people think that somehow we invited them and asked them. I'm trying to make the best of what I consider a very bad situation that we have to deal with.
And that's why I was surprised.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's really.
I just wanna say, I am happy to come back.
But I can get some.
I'm happy to answer further questions tonight and beyond tonight. I'm not just gone and back in Ann Arbor. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel like we do lots of these things. We provide comments to zoning guys. I'll leave it at this and invite any more questions.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
It's in a heavily hunted area. Sooner or later, some idiot is gonna shoot the batteries. They shoot your signs, they shoot your animals, someone's gonna shoot the batteries. What is the repercussions when they are shot by an arrow or a gun? It's gonna happen.
That is a great question.
This is economic triggers and alarm, I would think of a system at some point.
Well, puncture of the enclosure can cause thermal runoff. So, talking about hunting rights in the area would certainly be something that would be advisable to bring up to the developer to mention this concern.
It's private property at that point.
There's state land right next to it.
They're gonna trespass.
They do it all the time.
Well, I mean, if you shot a transformer, the same situation.
No one cares about private property.
I see your question over there.
My question is this, so, how, our homeowners insurance companies are gonna be like, oh, well, something just changed. Think about your insurance, think about the things they're not telling us. Think, use your brains, come on, guys. It's our investment too, they're just not coming in and investing, we have invested as well. Protect your investment. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.